the Neo Feminism agenda is derived directly out of satanic ideology. It comes out of Satanism. And one of the books that I highly recommend people to read when it comes to understanding the direct manipulation of the male mind in society is The Satanic Witch by Anton LaVey. A very little known book. Hardly anybody I know has ever read this book. And I think it's absolutely critical. It's a critical book to read to understand what's really going on in society. You know, this is it's a guidebook, if you will. It's an instruction manual for the neo-feminist agenda as far as I'm concerned. You know, and, you know, look, here's all you really have to deeply grasp at first. The social engineers who have constructed this agenda want the vast majority of women, and again, I'm going to make generalizations when I talk about this, all right? I'm going to use terms like the vast majority of. And if you're uncomfortable with that, like I said last week, turn the show off now, okay? I'm not interested in whether people get offended by, generalized statements. To understand this, you need to use generalizations. So I'm going to use most, almost all, almost every, the vast majority of, and if you're uncomfortable with that, tough. Okay? So the vast majority of women are being manipulated by this agenda, by them being essentially told and buying into the idea that what life is really about, folks, is pleasure and comfort and, you know, your daily pursuits. You know, the idea of the whole pursuit of happiness. Very ambiguous terminology, okay? Rights are left at the door when it comes to this mentality. All right? It's about me, 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 all day, every day. I try to explain to people that if I could explain to you what Satanism really is, when you say the term, everybody's mind goes to the idea of the Christian devil, you know, the red devil with the horns and the pitchfork and the tail, okay? This has little to zero to do with what I am calling Satanism, okay? Ideological Satanism, in which, and maybe this is a good time to explain this because we're talking about the connection between the neo-feminist agenda and Satanism. Satanists chose the name Satan because of the archetypal connection to the Christian adversary or opposer. That which is the adversary or opposer, which is what Satan means in Hebrew, to the Christ consciousness, to the higher consciousness, the higher mind, the connection to the higher self. The real savior of the world, which is making that connection to higher self and higher consciousness, and really being aware of what's going on within us and around us. Okay, Satanists chose that image because what they are trying to do is destroy that higher consciousness. Keep people in a state of low vibratory consciousness so that they can be controlled and therefore ruled and put into slavery and bondage. You know, as such, they're the adversaries of that Christ consciousness. You know, they don't want that type of consciousness rising in our society. They want to keep it quelled. So that's the reason they chose that. However, the ideology of Satanism has nothing to do with the worship of the Christian devil, the concept of the Christian devil. It is about pure selfishness being the highest aspiration in life. If I could encapsulate what satanic ideology is in a nutshell, it's waking up in the morning, and from the minute you wake up until the time you go to sleep that night, you aren't thinking about anything but yourself and what you could do to improve your own situation, and you never ever think about anybody else's situation. You never have any compassion for the suffering of other people in the world. You don't look at the world in a wider sense. You don't look at the injustices that are going on in the world in any kind of a wider sense. All you are doing is focused on me, 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 all day, every day. That is Satanism. That's what Satanism is, and I'm not asking you to believe or accept that's what Satanism is. I'm telling you definitively and factually as a former priest of this religion that that is in fact what Satanism is. Period. The end. And it doesn't make a difference whether you accept it or believe it or not. You know? Like I've said, if you want to know about any religion, you would probably want to go to the priest of that religion and ask them about it. Well, I was a former priest of Satanism, and I'm telling you that's what the religion is. Period. Now, when you think about that, how many people in society qualify as Satanists? And out of those people, how many of them are women? And I admit just about as many are probably men, but I'm telling you this is heavily, heavily, heavily marketed and peddled to women in society. And there's a reason for that. To get the moral decay of a society going, you have to get the women's mind first. You absolutely have to get their minds first. Because largely they're the people who are, quote unquote, raising children. And I say quote unquote because the parenting in our society is a joke. It's a joke. And women want to bear children, but they don't want to raise them properly. You know, because they weren't raised properly. And largely neither were the men that they're associating with at all. And I'll tell you that just from my perspective. I talked about this last week. I wasn't raised properly by my parents. I wasn't raised by my parents, period. Like I said last week, my real family, the people who really truly raised me, are people I don't know personally in my life, in person. They were people who communicated through their writings and through other forms of media what real morality is about. Before the break, I was talking about how Neo Feminism grew directly out of the satanic ideology. And there's no better evidence of that than the book The Satanic Witch by Anton LaVey, which I highly recommend everybody reading to understand a lot of the manipulation tactics that are really being used against men and how men are really being emasculated in this society. Controllers don't want any strong men in society because strong men are the only people who, strong, informed, and enlightened men are the only ones who are really going to wage any kind of physical resistance against tyranny of tyrannical government in society. Now, it's not to say that women would not be able to ideologically come out of their trance and understand the tyranny that's in place, you know, but when it comes to any kind of possible necessity for physical action, certainly men are going to be more likely than not the individuals who are going to be taking that action. That's why it's so important to get men completely emasculated in society. And this whole idea of the destruction of all moral values in society starts with taking the woman's mind over. Okay, because they've been in the traditional role throughout history as the nurturer and the one who is going to instill moral values into the child, okay, by teaching them. Especially since traditionally women stayed with the child. Now with women in the workforce, there's nobody except the state schools to basically instill so-called values into the child. And what's getting instilled in those schools? Social Darwinism. You know? The worship of money. The worship of the state. That's what's getting instilled into children. Scientism, you know, a total left-brained so-called education, which is a total indoctrination system of 50,000 hours of compulsory schooling with the child away from both parents. When you have parents who have not been raised with moral values, and the only thing that they've been taught to value is money. That's the value system, money. You know, where do you expect society to go? You expect it to become more free? You expect people to do great things in a free capacity? Expect it to go into chains into chains, which is exactly where it's at. And, you know, I tell people, let's make it personal. I don't need to go to anybody else or talk about anybody else as an example. Let's talk about my own family. My own family are completely ensconced and entrenched in a satanic mindset. Every member of my family except me. Maybe with the exception of one or two others who I would consider very semi-awake and aware and not really active. But in general, the entirety of my own family are in a satanic mindset. Never focusing on anything but me, all day long, every day. The women of my family don't care about rights. They don't care about freedom. They don't care about what's going on around them. And the only thing they tell their children is go out and make enough money. The only thing that my own mother was ever concerned with is whether I was making enough money or had a quote job. That's it. No involvement in any aspect of emotional or spiritual life whatsoever. Certainly not trying to raise me to an accurate and deep understanding of morality at all. Zero. Never mentioned it. No, just go along with the program, go along with the system, follow the rules, because you have to come out on top because you have to make enough money. That's all. Physical creature comforts, yeah, sure, taken care of. You know, as if that's all there is to the raising of a child. And you have millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people doing this, so-called raising their children like this, thinking that physical creature comforts are the only thing that a child needs met. That's it. Nothing else. So what surprise is there when we have totally inauthentic men and women in society that were never raised, that have no connection to the true self? And what I want to talk about is what women have been socially conditioned to desire, to want. Because that plays a huge role in what's going on. A gigantic role. What the inauthentic, socially conditioned woman, which is the vast, overwhelming majority of most women, want the corporate, inauthentic man. That's what they desire in society. And so the corporate, inauthentic man, the ones that will go down that path and play ball with the system, you know, most women will gravitate toward that. Toward the guy who is compliant, has been emasculated by the system, by government, and is completely compliant with all the rules and regulations. Because, you know, they'll basically make themselves, make their image into what their corporate masters want them to be, and then fall in line with whatever behaviors their corporate masters want from them. And most men will just do it because what most men in our society want is for women to be interested in them and paying attention to them. And that's what they're living their lives to try to accomplish. Not trying to get at the truth, not trying to understand what's going on in the world. They're chasing the inauthentic woman for the vast majority of their lives. And so they want to reinvent themselves into their corporate master's version of what a man should be. To look like they want them to look. To act like they want them to act. It's pathetic. And these aren't real men. They don't resemble real men in any way. And neither do the women who want men who are corporate doormats. And in general, that's what modern women want. They want either they want a corporate doormat that they can use as a resource, or they want a total dominator. You know? And this all stems from either wanting to be in the position of control or wanting to be controlled. The vast overwhelming majority, not all, There are some genuine, authentic women and genuine, authentic men left in this world, but the numbers are waning and dwindling, folks. And that's what the social engineers want. And how they put this idea into women's mind. You know, this idea of you have to get the person who's the most successful in society. You know? I have a question for listeners. I'd like to pose a question that is a social experiment I've done to try to highlight this dynamic. And folks, I realize how controversial this is. And I said it from the beginning. I'm not going to shy away from this. What I'm going to say needs to be said, and I'm going to say it anyway.